Well, Al, you certainly had a chance to see a lot of baseball in your day at Borchert Field in Milwaukee. And can you tell us, first of all, an overview of the ballpark, what it looked like when you saw a baseball game down there?
Well, first of all, Gene, you got to remember that at that time it was an all-wood structure. They didn't build these things like we have them today. The roof over the third base side was blown off in a severe windstorm. I think it was about 1939. And whenever the Brewers would get a strong rally going, everybody would start stomping their feet, and you'd think the whole thing was going to come down around your head. It was a scary feeling sometimes, but it was probably about 310, no more than that, down the foul lines. Dead away center was probably about 360, 365. And one of the things I remember so well about that field was when Al Dark was playing his minor league ball there back in the 40s. He was shortstop, and he led the league in triples. There was a flagpole that sat out in left center, and that was Al Dark's spot. He would aim for that, and he'd put the ball out there, and every time he did it, it would end up in a triple. There, Al Dark be perched on third base. Those are the sorts of things I remember the most. The wood park, the roof being blown off, the rallies of the fans. In the summertime, every year, late in the season, like mid to late August, they would hold the state semi-pro tournament there. And there were some very strong teams representing even this part of the state. I remember Neilsville used to send a very strong squad down. Ladysmith was represented. Hayward would come down. Then there were teams from the Milwaukee area. At that time, there was strong industrial league baseball in Milwaukee. And there would be 4 or 5 teams representing the Milwaukee Industrial League. Teams like Falk, A.O. Smith, Harnischweger. The police and fire department each had a ball team. And I remember I can't remember the name, but there was a pitcher that played for the police department that had been a minor league player and a very good ball player, still a strong pitcher. The games would start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they would schedule the last one to start hopefully about 8 o'clock at night. They had a no new inning rule after an hour and 55 minutes of play. That way they could kind of limit how long they played. My dad, my uncle, and I would go out, and we would be there for the first game in the morning at 10 o'clock, pack a lunch, and we would stay. Sometimes we didn't get home until 9, 10 o'clock at night. We'd sit out there all day watching baseball. It was good baseball, and it was wonderful entertainment. I have a lot of fond memories of Old Borchert Field.
For people who remember the Polo Grounds, I would think that the two stadiums, in terms of their design, their layout, were similar, the bathtub type design, and so fans were wondering how the dimensions got to be so odd at the Borchert Field site. That's the reason it was that bathtub type design like the Polo Grounds, wasn't it?
Yes, and because of where it was built right in the heart of the city. The ballpark sat between 7th and 8th Street and between Chambers and Burleigh. So you had just one square city block, and you've got to configure your ballpark to fit within that. So this is why you end up with that lopsided design of a very strong poke in order to get the ball out of the park, dead away center. And the foul lines, of course, were a little bit shorter.
Anything that you can think of that made the game unique or unusual in that ballpark because of the dimensions?
The pitching. You had to be very careful. When you were pitching to the strength of the hitters, you had a pitcher out there that could make sure he kept the ball on the ground, because if you got it up in the air down either left or right field, it didn't take much of a poke to put it out of the ballpark. One of the other things I remember, and we were talking about a little earlier, was Al Dark and the way he played at Borchert Field. When he went to the majors, they had to break him of a habit that he had developed in Milwaukee. He was throwing to a first baseman named Heinz Becker, and he was called Der Schlager. And old Heinz was on the last couple of years of his playing life. He was a little bit slow in getting to first, so Al Dark had developed this bad habit of kind of lobbing the ball to first instead of throwing it over on a straight line. When he got to the majors, they had to break him of that habit of lobbing the ball to first. And that's one of the things that happens in minor league baseball in those days that you don't see probably happening today.
Well, Al Dark was a great ball player, and I'm sure you saw many other great ball players who played for the Brewers or came through in the association. How about some of those other guys that you remember?
Well, I remember Del Rice, who went on to a great catching career in the National League. He played catcher for the old Milwaukee Brewers. There was a fellow who played second base, Danny Murtaugh, and he had picked up the nickname of Whistling Danny Murtaugh because whenever he was playing out in the field at second base position, he was whistling all the time. And you could hear him all the way all through the entire ballpark. It was interesting to listen to Whistling Danny Murtaugh. Trying to think of some of the others.
Well, you saw some local guys, both Johnny Schmitz and Jim Delsing from central Wisconsin, I understand, played down there.
Yes, I remember Jim Delsing in particular, a very, very strong American Association ball player. When the Brewers were playing in the American Association, in my era of watching them back in the 40s, they were a very strong American Association team and quite often would be in the Little World Series, which would many times be I think Montreal was in the International League, and they had quite a competition going because of the Brewers being competitive every year in the American Association. Delsing was one of my favorites also. I enjoyed watching him very much. I was talking with Cy Bucher a few years ago, about I think 3 years ago, and we got talking about old Borchert Field, and of course he had pitched there. And for the life of me, I just vaguely remember the name, but I really can't say I remember seeing him pitch, which I feel kind of bad about that. I wish I could say I remember that, but I don't.
How about some of the rivalries that the old Brewers had? Who were the tough teams in the association that were the big rivals for them back in that era?
The Indianapolis Indians were always a very strong team. Then there was the St. Paul Saints, and Minneapolis had the Minneapolis Millers. There were the Kansas City team, the Blues, Kansas City Blues, the Toledo Mud Hens, and of course that was revived when MASH was very popular on TV because of that show. But Toledo, as I remember, was not one of the stronger teams in the league. Louisville Colonels were another team that were very strong. So it was a strong league. It was good baseball all the time.
Can you describe, Al, some other aspects of the ballpark, the concourses or concession areas, or what they were like, what it was like to walk into this place?
When you came into the ballpark, there was a very narrow concession stand, walk area. And there was only about, I don't think there were more than 3 concession stands. So if you went during the ball game, and it was a pretty good sellout crowd there, and I don't remember the capacity of attendance there. I don't think it was much more than about 11 or 12,000, I think, at the most. When you went down during the game, you stood in line a long time in order to get served at the concession stand. And also talking about that, now we got to talk prices. You could get a soda for a nickel. The scorecards sold for a nickel, I remember that. Hot dogs were 10 cents. They didn't sell hamburgers. They didn't sell bratwurst. They had bags of popcorn. Oh, another thing that you might find interesting, Gene. They sold, the scorecards had a number on them. And during the ball game, they would pick numbers of the lucky number scorecards. And one of the big prizes I remember was boxes of Snurkle candy bars. The Snurkles were a very strong supporter of the Brewers, so you got this box of Snurkle candy bars, which to this day I don't think I care for them, but it was another thing that I remember about old Borchert Field.
Tell us about getting to Borchert Field.
Okay, when, of course, I was not driving, I was not even a teenager yet, and there was a streetcar that I would take. I'd leave my home and I'd go down on Valete Street to 7th and pick up the 7th Street streetcar, and that would take me up to 7th and Chambers. And that streetcar ran until probably the late 40s before the transport company had converted that over to the trackless trolley system. And that's another thing that, of course, you don't even see today. There is no such thing as a trackless trolley where you got this pole up in the air connecting to an electrical line for power. To get out to the ballpark, it took me probably close to 45 minutes. And I have to figure on that because the streetcars stop every 2 blocks. So it wasn't the fastest way to get out to the ballpark.
I would imagine that most people, though, went your way by bus or trolley or tram or something, and probably in a neighborhood like that, parking was not real abundant.
But that's another thing. You didn't take your car out there because it was city streets and there just was not a great deal of parking. In fact, I do not recall a parking lot per se within any of the area or immediately around the ballpark. Primarily you did come to the game by public transportation.
Where did you usually sit when you went in there, and what was the view of the ballpark like from there?
My favorite spot was always on the third base side. As I said, I was a great fan of Al Dark, and of course then I could watch Al play very closely there at the shortstop position. And sitting there, if there was a ball hit right near the foul line on the left field line, you wouldn't get to see the play because your configuration of the ballpark, you just lost it. There was very little foul territory there along the left field line also. So, in fact, it reminds me somewhat when I watched them play down in Chicago, because I think they even have more foul territory than we had at old Borchert Field. So you couldn't really see the whole field from where I sat. But that was my favorite spot to sit.
But you really couldn't see the whole field maybe from any place in the ballpark, could you?
Probably not. If anywhere at all, you might have been able to see the whole thing immediately, and one of the just slightly elevated seats right behind home plate. You might be able to see most of it there. But that would be about the only spot.
Or maybe if you were in one of the corners up, you could look down into your corner and see the other corner. That was about it.
Yeah, if you were right up in the top of the corner, then you probably would be able to see it all. But even then, kind of iffy because just the way it was built. And the seats did not go all the way to the wall. They're on the left or the right field foul line, as I remember them.
Tell us about the decision to build a new ballpark. What was that like in the early 50s when people in Milwaukee decided that they needed a new stadium?
Well, interestingly enough, at that time I was gone in the service. I had graduated from high school in 50. I went into the service with the outbreak of the Korean action, and my dad kept me very well abreast by mail what was going on. And of course there was a lot of interest in putting up a new stadium, the excitement of it. But then my dad told me where they were going to build it, and that area of Milwaukee in my youth was called Pigsville. And Dad told me this was where they were going to build it, and I thought, well, why would they ever want to build a stadium down in Pigsville of all places? But as it turned out, I think it is a pretty good spot in the city for accessibility, for driving and everything today.
Borchert Field, was it missed, do you think, by people after County Stadium was built?
Probably some of the historians and the nostalgia buffs would probably say they missed it. And it was a different type of baseball at that time. You didn't see the hitting that you see today. You had a lot more singles hitters. In the American Association, your home run champion probably never had more than 14 or 15 in a season. So it was a lot more of the steal, run, this type of ball. Hit a couple singles and steal a base and try to bring them in that way.
I think that would be very odd to most of our listeners who would think because of those dimensions it was a big home run ballpark, but apparently that was not the case.
No, it was not a big home run ballpark. And of course, the kids, the younger people, they would position themselves right out behind left field like they do in Chicago. And if a home run ball was hit out there and you brought it back to the ballpark, you got your free admission. And talking about free admissions, Gene, during the war years, if you brought some scrap metal in, like a toy or whatever that was made of metal, you brought it to the ballpark as part of the war effort of trying to collect metal, you gained free admission to the ballpark. A couple of my toys went that way because that's how I got into the ballpark. I was from a large family, not a lot of money, so it was tough to get in to go to the ball games, but I loved the game, and so I went a lot.
Was the stadium used for anything else? The Packers had played there for a season a bit before your time, and it was used, I guess, for some practice facilities by other NFL teams coming in to play the Packers. But do you recall like high school football or Negro League baseball or anything else going on in there?
Oh, yes, very much so. The Negro Leagues used to come into Milwaukee every year. And just recently on TV, they talked about the women's team that was formed during the war years, and I remember them playing there also. They did not use the field ever for football that I recall, high school or anything like that, but they did have donkey games there. These traveling groups that would come in, you'd have a donkey baseball game. They used Borchert Field for that. The city high school baseball championship was played at Borchert Field. But it's interesting too about these gals, because when they made the movie A League of Their Own, they talked about the Milwaukee representative team that was in that league, and I remember watching the gals play. It was interesting baseball.
Al, before we wrap it up, any other final thoughts you have about Borchert Field and watching baseball over there for so many years?
Well, I miss it. Again, the friendliness of the confines of it, just the people that were there. It was a different game entirely. When I came home from the service and I went out to County Stadium, I looked at it. It's really nice to see this modern facility, but it just wasn't the same as old Borchert Field.